Hello and welcome to our channel. Here we share real, chilling stories from the internet. Stories that will haunt you. Subscribe and let's begin. This terrifying story happened to my cousin just 10 days ago, and it still gives me chills. She has 4 kids, and they had been living with her husband's parents. But eventually, things got too cramped, so they decided to move into a private house in the countryside. The property was huge, and there were barely any neighbors around. It was about 2 months after they moved in when the kids started saying they were seeing strange, shadowy figures of men lurking in the yard. At first, the parents brushed it off, thinking it was just their imagination. But things took a dark turn one night. It was the middle of winter, and to stay warm, they heated the house with a stove, tossing the ashes over the fence. One night around midnight, my cousin needed to use the bathroom. Since they lived in the country, the bathroom was outside, just beside the fence where they'd been throwing the ashes. As she walked past the fence, she looked up, and something was standing above her. With all the courage she could muster, she glanced up. And that's when it dropped straight in front of her feet. Frozen with fear, she ran back toward the house, but the terror was so overwhelming that by the time she reached the door, her legs went numb, and she collapsed right on the threshold. One half of her body was still outside, the other inside. Suddenly, she felt something grab her legs, dragging her back into the yard. Panicked, she screamed as loud as she could. Thankfully, her husband heard her and rushed to the rescue, but whatever it was didn't let go, pulling her out even more. Her husband managed to drag her inside, lock all the doors, and they spent the entire night awake, terrified. The next morning, they packed their things and rushed back to his parents' house. My cousin hasn't been the same since. For 10 days, she's been paralyzed, unable to walk or speak. The kids and her husband refuse to go back to the house. They say it's just too terrifying and unsafe. It was 2003. I was 13 and my mom was 8 months pregnant. My stepfather's sister invited us to live with her in a small, isolated village. The place was old, quiet, and surrounded by nothing but thick forests and empty fields. The village had mostly dormitories, and we ended up in one of them. The room itself was big, but it felt off. There was something heavy in the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. It was hard to explain, but the atmosphere was thick, like the house was watching us. The bathroom was shared with other tenants. A sink, creaky wooden floors, and an old bed. But what really stood out was the massive, old wood-burning stove near the balcony. It was the only source of heat. At first, we were in shock. There was no gas, no electric stove, just this ancient, monstrous stove. My stepfather's sister, who was barely around, told us we'd have to buy coal and light it ourselves. And when she left for the city, she made one last request. "Don't forget to feed my house spirit," she said, placing a bowl of food on top of the wardrobe. "He likes to be fed." We didn't take her seriously. We thought it was some kind of a joke. But then, things started to change. One night, a few weeks later, my mom and I were in bed. It was after midnight. I'd finished my homework and was trying to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The room was cold, and the weight of the night pressed down on us. I was lying there facing the wall, trying not to touch my mom's pregnant belly. Suddenly, I heard it. At first, it was a faint sound, a scraping, like metal against metal, up and down, up and down. It didn't make sense. I thought maybe it was a loose part of the bed, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. The scraping started moving. It was like something was underneath the bed, shifting it. I could feel the vibrations of it rattling through the metal frame, up through the mattress. And then it got closer, right underneath my mom's belly. I froze. I couldn't move. My mom, half asleep, hit me lightly and said, "Stop moving." but I wasn't moving at all. I was paralyzed, my heart racing in my chest. The sound was unmistakable. Something was in the room with us. Something that didn't belong. It felt like hours, though it was probably only a minute or two, but neither of us could speak. We were too scared to breathe, too scared to even move a muscle. It was like the very air in the room had turned thick, suffocating. All I could think was, what if it's on my side? Or worse, what if it's on my mom's side? Neither of us knew what to do. In that moment, all I could think of was to pray. We started quietly praying, hoping that whatever it was would leave us alone. We repeated the words over and over, desperate for the sound to stop. And finally, it did. The scraping sound disappeared, and the room fell silent again. The next morning, my stepfather's sister came back. We told her what happened, our voices shaking. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she was almost nonchalant about it. "Did you feed my house spirit?" she asked casually. "If not, you won't have peace here. He gets angry if you forget." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but there was no denying what we had heard, and we had 1 more month left in that place. We weren't going to take any more chances. When my mom went to the hospital to give birth, I was left alone in the dormitory. It was the worst experience of my life. Every night, I could hear things in the house. The creaky floorboards, the whispers in the shadows. I couldn't sleep there, so I'd go stay with a friend until my mom returned. It wasn't until recently that I learned just how terrified my mom had been during that time. She told me she'd never been so scared in her life. From the moment we moved in, she felt like something was walking around the house at night. The floorboards would creak, doors would open and close by themselves. But instead of staying in the room and waiting for me to come home, she'd leave. She'd walk around the school grounds, pacing outside to calm her nerves. I had no idea she'd been doing this, but looking back, it makes sense. That place, it wasn't just a house, it was something else entirely, something dark. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that we weren't alone there, that something was always watching. Before moving to Moscow, I spent my entire childhood in a small town in Siberia. My mom, my younger brother, and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. At first, we all slept together on the same couch, but as we got older, things changed. I had to move to a small couch in the kitchen. It wasn't something that happened every night, though. Most of the time, I stayed over at my grandmother's house. The kitchen couch was positioned right in the doorway, so whenever I lay there, my gaze was always drawn to the door frame. I'd try to turn away, not wanting to look that way, but I never really felt scared. Not at first. One night, though, something felt different. It was as if the night stretched on forever, like I was trapped in this half-awake state, barely able to drift off. And then, just before dawn, I finally slipped into a light sleep, lying on my back. When I woke up, I was still in the same position, but this time, something had changed. My gaze, once again, was directed right at the doorway. And that's when I saw it. There, just barely hidden behind the edge of the door frame, was something. It was too dark to make out what it was, but I could feel it watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart froze in my chest. It wasn't a passing thought or a trick of the light. It was there, hiding in the shadows, staring at me as I slept. A cold, primal fear surged through me, and I couldn't move. I lay frozen, paralyzed by terror, my hair standing on end. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. The silence was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to whisper, barely able to speak. "Who's there?" But there was no answer, just the oppressive silence hanging in the air. I wanted to run to my mom's room to escape whatever was lurking there. But to do that, I'd have to pass through that doorway to face whatever was waiting for me. My heart pounded in my ears as I forced myself to stand up, my legs trembling, and then, just as I started running, my hair caught on a nail sticking out of the doorframe. For a split second, I thought someone had grabbed me. That sensation, that cold, unforgiving grip, shot through me, and I held in my scream as long as I could. But when I realized what happened, when I realized it was just my hair caught on the nail, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I let out a scream so loud, so blood-curdling, it echoed in my own ears. I ran faster, stumbling toward my mom's room. I burst through the door, waking her up in a panic. She tried to calm me down, and together we decided to go back to the kitchen to see what had really happened. My mom turned on the light in the hallway, and we moved quietly, our steps careful, as if we were trying not to disturb something watching us from the shadows. When I reached for the light switch in the kitchen, I saw it. A lock of my own hair was hanging from the nail in the doorway. The fear started to subside, but a deep, unsettling feeling lingered. I knew, without a doubt, that I hadn't imagined it. That thing, whatever it was, had been there, and it was real. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep on that couch again. I stopped staying with my mom for a long time. The feeling of being watched never left me, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was still out there, lurking in the dark, waiting. Throughout my life, strange and mystical experiences seemed to follow me, even as a child. But there's one event that stands out. My maternal grandmother had a unique gift. She could predict the future, and it appeared to be passed down to the women in our family. Anything we said had a way of coming true, without even trying. I didn't have typical dreams like others. Mine were warnings or glimpses into the future, and sometimes they showed me terrifying creatures, causing me to feel like I was suffocating. These visions haunted me until I was 12, when certain rituals were done to remove them. After the lockdown, when topics like astrology and tarot became popular, I grew curious. I found that I had a knack for predicting things, helping people find career paths and offering accurate readings, though I only shared it with close friends and family. I even got a tarot deck and soon became so skilled that I no longer needed the guidebook. My parents even asked me to do readings for their business, and everything I predicted came true. Then, a woman who was deep into esotericism asked me to read for her. I did, and as usual, everything was spot on. She even asked me to touch her tarot cards, wanting my energy to infuse them. But soon after, everything changed. I started reading about prayer, and during Ramadan, I decided to leave all that esoteric stuff behind and immerse myself in my faith. I felt a deep sense of peace and calm, dedicating myself to religious practices. However, one night, I had a terrifying experience. I woke up, unable to move, paralyzed in place. My body felt heavy, and it was as if something was suffocating me. Then, I saw it, standing at the foot of my bed. The creature was massive, around 10 to 12 feet tall, with a gaunt, emaciated frame. Its skin was torn in places, revealing raw, exposed flesh that was covered in dirt and a dark, greasy liquid. I could see its bones jutting out at odd angles, and its eyes were bloodshot, glowing red with no pupils. The teeth were sharp and black as coal, and it had 2 horns that twisted like waves in the air. It crouched, but I could feel that if it stood, it wouldn't even fit in the room. Its long, twisted arms ended in claws, which it had wrapped tightly around my throat. I heard a hissing sound, like it was trying to speak, but the words were unintelligible. I struggled to speak, to recite a prayer, but my mouth wouldn't move. All I could do was silently recite a prayer in my mind. Slowly, my tongue began to move, each word feeling like it drained all my strength. But I managed to say the prayer aloud, With that, my body started to respond. I fought against the creature's grip and somehow I broke free. Crawling on my hands and knees, unable to move my legs, I made my way to my parents' room, trembling and crying. The next morning, I thought it was just a nightmare, but when I saw the red marks on my neck, I knew it wasn't. My mom suggested I recite more prayers to calm myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, especially since during Ramadan, many believe that dark forces are bound. I later learned that not all of them are, and some still roam free, especially targeting those who have recently embraced their faith. That's when it clicked. I realized that my past involvement in astrology and tarot had been a form of shirk, associating others with a higher power, and that was a serious mistake. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Have a similar experience? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Take care and see you in the next video.